Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om Sadashivasamarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam Om. In the previous talk, we had been examining the examples that had occurred in the sixth chapter of the Chandogya Upanishad. So, in the first talk, we had looked at the example of the hawk and the string, which occurred in the eighth khanda of the sixth adhyaya of the Chandogya. In the next series of talks, we had looked at the example of honey from different flowers when they are merged in the honeycomb, that it is impossible to differentiate between the honey from one flower versus the honey from the other flower. In the next khanda, the 10th khanda, we had looked at the example of different rivers that emerge from the ocean, go back and merge into the ocean. And once they are part of the ocean, it is impossible to differentiate between the rivers. In the 11th khanda, we had looked at the example of how the entirety of the tree was pervaded with life. And when one part of the tree was cut, life, so to speak, oozed out. And when life departed from that part of the tree, the physical tree dried up and withered away. So, with that example, the all pervading nature of the self was talked about. How it pervades the entire physical body but is independent from the physical body. And when the self, so to speak, leaves the body, it leaves the body dead. Using all these examples, the Siddhikara had argued that the Tattvamasi Vakya that occurs 9 times from 6.8 to 6.16 of the Chandogya Upanishad, and there are 9 examples given in each of those instances. All those examples are compatible with Advaita, are compatible with an understanding of Abheda, and therefore the Nyayamritakara's contention that the Padacheda should be Sa Atma Tattvamasi, meaning Sa Atma Atattvamasi, that contention by the Nyayamritakara was untenable, was what was argued by the Siddhikara. And so, continuing in that series, we had looked at 4 examples from 6.8 to 6.11. Now we will look at 6.12, where we will be examining the example of the Nyagrodha Phalam, the fruit of the banyan tree. In the 12th khanda of the 6th adhyaya, the Acharya Uddalaka Aruni asks his son Shvetaketu to bring the fruit of the banyan tree. Nyagrodha Phalam Ahara, he says. And so the son brings the fruit and shows it to his father. He says, break that. Bhindi. And so he breaks it. And then he says, it's broken, sir. Kimatra pashyasi, what do you see there? The son says, Anya iva ima dhana bhagavaha. I see very small seeds that are like small seeds like anu, like atoms. He says, Asam angaikam bhindi, break one of those small seeds, he says. So he breaks that small seed. And then the father asks, Kimatra pashyasi, what do you see in it? He says, nothing. I don't see anything when I break the seeds. Na kinchana bhagavaha. I don't see anything at all. The father says, from the seeming nothing, the entire banyan tree has come. So, when you break the fruit, you get the seeds. And when you break the seeds, you say there is nothing. But the entire banyan tree came from that nothing. So he says, Yam vai soumya itamanimanam na nibhalayase etasya vai soumya ishonimnaha evam mahanyagrodha tishtati. In this seeming nothing, the entire banyan tree was present. Because it is in its subtlest form, you are unable to see that cause. And therefore, he says in the next mantra, Saya eshaha anima aitadatmyam idam sarvam tat satyam sa atma tattvamasi shvetaketu. Just like you are not able to see the tree when it is present in its causal state within the seed, similarly, it is possible for this highly diverse and varied universe to emerge from a attributeless, divisionless, highly subtle Sat. Because one of the questions that is often asked of Advaita is, we say that Brahman is without any features, without any Visheshanas, Nirvishesham Brahma. But the world contains so many differences, so much multifariousness, so much variety. How is this much variety possible to emerge from a Brahman which has no features or variety present within it? And in response to such a question, it is said in this Adhyaya that the banyan tree does emerge from the seed, despite the fact that when you break open the seed, you don't see the banyan tree sitting within it. Similarly, even though there is no variety present in Brahman, it is possible for this hugely varied universe to emerge from Brahman, to spring from Brahman, just like that banyan tree that sprung from that seed. The Nyayamritakara interprets this differently. He says, in the father's response, Etasyaiva somya esha animnaha evam mahanyagrodhas tishtati, the word anima does not refer to the seeds, rather it refers to Ishvara who is highly subtle. Because the word anu means subtle, and the word anima, he says, refers to Ishvara here, not to the seeds themselves. And he proves this by two factors. First, he says that in this section itself, the next mantra talks about the Mahavakya, and it starts off by saying Saya Esho Anima Aitadatmyamidam Sarvam. So here, the word anima in the next mantra is used in the sense of referring to Ishvara. So in the previous mantra also, the word anima must refer to Ishvara, it cannot refer to the seeds. And secondly, he says, if you look at what the sun says Anvya iva imadhanaha. So in that, he is not using the word anima, he is using anvyaha. So this Nyayamritakara says, if you look at the word anvyaha, he says bhava pratyaya rahitena strilingena bahuvachanantena iva shabda shiraskena anushabdena nirdishtataya tad viparita anima shabda anarhatvacha. So he's saying the sun is referring to anvyaha in the sense of the seeds, but the father is referring to anima in the sense of Ishvara. And the reason for that, he says that the word anvyaha doesn't have the bhava pratyaya. So the bhava pratyaya meaning anima. Anima is the bhava pratyaya form of the word anu, indicating the quality of subtlety. And so here he is referring to these subtle seeds. The sun is referring to subtle seeds. And secondly, it is used in Strilinga. And thirdly, that is in the feminine gender. And the third thing, it's used in the plural. So therefore, it cannot be referring to anima meaning Ishvara. Therefore, wherever you're talking about anu, it must refer to something which is not Ishvara. And where you're referring to anima, it must necessarily refer to Ishvara. And further he says, if you look at what the sun is saying, he's saying Anvya iva imaha dhanaha. So the iva shabda refers to means like. So they are like seeds. So that being the case, you cannot say that the word anima also must necessarily refer to seeds, because the sun has already used the word anvyaha to refer to the seeds. So if the father was referring to the seeds, he must also have used anvyaha only. But he has used anima, and therefore it must mean that the anima word refers to Ishvara and not the seeds themselves. So that being the case, his argument is that the Ishvara and the Jiva cannot be compared, because the Jiva, in the sense of the seeds he is comparing to the Jivas, And the subtle thing which causes the seeds to have the generating potential, he is calling Ishvara, and he's using Anima for that. So there is a difference between these two, and therefore they're referring to two different things. And therefore there is difference, that is what is indicated. Now the Siddhikara says, well, you cannot say it as a general rule that wherever you're using the word Anu, it cannot refer to Ishvara, and therefore if you have to refer to Ishvara, only the word Anima must be used. So if you look at the Mundaka Upanishad mantra, Eshonuratma Chetasa Viditavyaha, the subtle Atma must be known by the mind. So here the words are Eshaha Anuhu Atma. So this Atma which is subtle. So in the Mundaka Upanishad, Ishvara or the Paramatma is referred to as Anuhu. Now the same Ishvara in the Chandogya Upanishad is referred to as Esha Anima, he who is Anima. So the Ishvara is referred to in one Upanishad as Anu and another Upanishad as Anima. So the word Anu is without the Bhava Pratyaya, the word Anima is with the Bhava Pratyaya. So if the same word with and without the Bhava Pratyaya can be used to refer to Ishvara, why can't the same word with and without the Bhava Pratyaya refer to the seeds? So the son may refer to without the Bhava Pratyaya as Anvyaha, and the father may refer to it as Anima. So there is nothing wrong with this. So the father can say Animnaha in the plural. So there, just because in one case one person is using it in without the bhava pratyaya and another person is using with the bhava pratyaya, does not mean that they are not referring to the same thing. So if Ishvara can be used in that way, similarly the seeds also can be referred to in the same way. Now the Nyayamritakara is replying to that, but the father is saying na nibhalayase, you do not see it. Now what does that mean? It is referring to Ishvara because Ishvara is beyond perception. So that is why it is saying na nibhalayase. Now if the seeds are there, they can see the seeds. No, the seeds are definitely available for perception. Why did the father say na nibhalayase? So therefore the Animnaha there must refer to Ishvara, it cannot refer to the seeds. The Siddhikara says, no, you have missed the point here, because what the father wants to convey is that within the seeds that you can see is the banyan tree that you cannot. And therefore, the intent of the father is to say that the varied creation that is emerging from Sat, that creation can have variety even when there is no variety perceptible within the cause. Even when variety is not seen in the cause, you can see it in the effect. To convey that, he is using the example within the seed of the banyan tree lies the entire banyan tree, which is not perceptible. You may be able to perceive the seeds themselves, but you're not able to perceive the banyan tree which is within it. So the Nanibhalayase refers to the fact that the student cannot see the banyan tree that is lying in there. So that is the intention of this. Now to this, the natural question is, how is it possible for you to see the effect but not see the cause? How can you know that the cause exists if you cannot see it? To answer this question begins the next khaNDa, the 13th khaNDa. The father asks the son to go fetch some salt and some water. The son does that. And then he says, mix the salt into the water. And so the son does that. And then he says, dissolve it. So the son stirs the water and then dissolves the salt. And then the next day he calls his son again and says, oh, the salt that I gave you, can you go bring it back for me? So the next day the father says, okay, go fetch that salt that I gave you yesterday. And the son, like a dutiful son, he goes and puts his hand into the pitcher of water and then tries to take the salt out of it, but he cannot take it out. He says, I cannot do that. He says, it's been dissolved already, I cannot take it out like that. So the father says, okay, now take a sip of the water from the top of the pitcher. And then he sips it. And then the father asks, how does it taste? The son says, it tastes saltish, it's salty. And then he says, okay, pour a little bit out. And then you have the middle of the pitcher. Now taste that water again. And the son tastes it. He says, how is it? He said, it's salty. And then he says, okay, pour the rest. And then take the last bit and then taste it. How does it taste? He says, it's salty. He says, no, okay, fine. So you have thrown away all the water, come back. He says, when I asked you, give me the salt, were you able to take the salt out? You are not able to take the salt out with your hand. But then you're able to taste the salt through and through the water. In every section of the water, from the top, middle, and the bottom, you are able to taste it, and you know the salt had completely pervaded the water from top to bottom. Despite the fact that you couldn't see it, despite the fact that you couldn't extract that salt from the water, when you tasted it, you knew that the salt was there. Similarly, just because you cannot see the Sat in this creation, you're not able to directly perceive it as the cause. Do not for 1 minute think that the Sat does not exist. It pervades every element of creation. It is all that is there in creation is that Sat. Just like the salt was everywhere, Sat is everywhere. It is the basis for this entire creation, but you need to know it with the right pramana. If we tried to extract the salt using the hand, we could not do it. We tried to see the salt, we could not see it. But we were able to try a different pramana and we knew that the salt existed. Similarly, despite the fact that Brahman is not perceptible, it is not accessible to the five senses, you cannot see it, feel it, smell it, hear it. Despite all those things, Brahman exists and it can be attained by using Shastra Pramana. So, by using scripture as the basis to know Brahman, one can attain Brahman. Just like you're able to taste the salt despite the fact that it is not perceptible through the eyes. By using a different Pramana, you are able to see the Sat. So, those are the two messages that are being conveyed by this particular section, the 13th Adhyaya. Now, this Nyayamritakara again, he argues that there is a difference between the salt and the water. The Lavanam and the Udakam are two different things, and therefore you cannot use it to argue that Abheda is being referred to here. It must refer to difference alone. It is incompatible with Advaita. And the Siddhikara gives the explanation that we gave. That is, the purpose of this example is to convey how it is possible to access Sat even though it is not perceptible. The previous khaNDa had established that you may not be able to see the Sat, but the Sat is the creator of the entire universe. Now, the natural question is, well, if Sat is the creator of the entire universe and I can see the universe, why cannot I see Sat? And the answer given is, yes, sometimes it happens that through one pramana you cannot see it, but through another pramana you can realize it. So using Shastra Pramana it is possible, and therefore the purpose of this khaNDa is not to talk about a difference between the Lavanam and the Udakam, the salt and the water. The purpose of this example is to convey that sometimes it is not possible to know things using one means of knowledge, but through another means of knowledge the same thing can be discerned. Similarly, the purpose of this khaNDa is to reveal that even though Brahman is not perceptible, it can be accessed through some other senses. So with that, we have looked at the 5th and 6th times that the Mahavakyam Tattvamasi occurs in the 12th and the 13th khaNDas of the Chandogya Upanishad 6th chapter. And the two examples that we looked at in this chapter are, we looked at the seed of the banyan tree and the salt in the water. And through these two examples also we established why there was no basis to argue that the Padacheda should be Sa Atma Tattvamasi, because there is nothing incompatible in these sections with Advaita. In fact, Advaita is what has been established as the Tatparya of this entire section, the import of this entire section, and therefore to argue that on the basis of the examples that the repetition is of Atattvamasi is incompatible with the Tatparya, it is not at all appropriate. With that, we will pause this session, and we will look at the next few examples in the next session. Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.